All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here with us this evening. We've been laughing for the last 15 minutes as we're preparing to start this event, so we're all very excited to be here. This is our very first event of the 2021 YPFP NATO series, sponsored by NATO's Public Diplomacy Division, so thank you to NATO for sponsoring this event. To start off, my name is Elisa Cherry. I am the Director of Security and Defense with YPFP Brussels. Again, I want to personally thank NATO's Public Diplomacy Division for supporting us throughout this event and also throughout the past years, because we've been working with them for, I think, 6 years now. So thank you to them for enabling us to do this event and to bring you guys new content in new COVID-friendly ways. So yes, and with that, I would also like to thank our two speakers. With me tonight, I have Mr. Michael Callender, the head of Aerospace Capabilities Section at NATO within the Defense Investment Division, and his colleague, Ross McKenzie, who is an officer on unmanned, armed, and automated systems, also in the same unit at NATO. So, Michael and Ross, welcome, and thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So, to our audience joining us today, we're going to go over a quick housekeeping session before we begin. We will use the chat function for our event, so at any point if you have questions, put them in the chat, and I have the live stream here on my lap, so I will be able to keep up with everyone's questions. And you can write them at any point. We're going to go through the questions at the end after Michael and Ross give their presentation. If there are any audio problems or video problems, just type it in the chat. We've got a team of people supporting behind the camera to make things run smoothly, so just let us know in the chat and we will help you guys out. And definitely stick around to the end, because we've got lots of exciting things coming in the discussion, and hopefully some advice to young professionals from Michael and Ross about how to engage in the topic of autonomous weapon systems. So with that, I would perhaps just like to ask you guys to introduce yourselves, and yeah, absolutely. And then we'll get started on the presentation for about 15-20 minutes, and then we'll go into the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Elisa. First of all, one, thank you to the young professionals for inviting us here tonight. I think this is a good topic to start on. I just want to give some caveats, though. We're not going to dive too deep into lethal autonomous weapons. I mean, the name says it all. You don't need to ask any questions, but you do need to know as a young professional how to process, how to deal with topics like lethal autonomous weapons. And as I told you before in the start, you know, our job as, we're both retired military, we're on our second careers. Our job is to grow the next generation of whether it's foreign policy professionals or security professionals, or just young people trying to be professional within either government work or civilian work. So Ross and I are very excited about doing that. I'm retired from the United States Air Force. And then I moved over here to Brussels because 21 years ago I stole the best that Belgium had to offer and dragged her around the world with me, and I was fortunate enough to get a job and bring her back home so that we could be by family. And it's just fabulous living and working here. So Ross?
Thank you, Michael. Elisa, thank you, and thank you for the warm welcome. And indeed, I echo Michael's warm thank you to the young professionals that are watching. I think Elisa might have fibbed a little bit. She said there'd be like 12, 14 people. We see that many in the room, and we see a camera facing us, and we're out on YouTube. So big up YouTube. That's the only young phrase I'm going to even attempt tonight, because otherwise I'll embarrass myself. Ross McKenzie, work with Michael inside NATO, 26 years in the Royal Air Force, I'm proud to say. Prior to that, I was a pilot during those times, but at the latter part of my career moved into policy work, so I hope to add value into the discussion there. I too took away the best of Belgium, and Michael and I both have in common that we have Belgian wives, and there's part of the reason that we settled over here. But joking apart, totally echo what Michael says. It's about the next generation. Everything that we do focuses on NATO capability. And if there's one capability NATO's going to need, it's that next generation. So I think we'll probably leave it there, and I'll hand back to Michael, and we'll crack on with the presentation.
Yeah.
Thank you, Elisa.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys, for your introductions, and I'm glad that you are both here and that you're happy in Brussels. I've been here for 3 years, and I don't know if I can imagine myself leaving at any point, so I don't know what that says about me or the Belgian system. But yeah, so with that, we can roll right into the presentation. So we've got a PowerPoint prepared, just so the audience is aware at home. They're going to be talking over the PowerPoint, so there's not going to be any audio, any audio on the PowerPoint, just so you guys are aware. You don't need to type that there's no audio. We know it. And with that, we can get started.
Well, thank you, and I'll jump right into it. We've designed this briefing to be fairly short so that we can have a good exchange and answer any questions or have an exchange of views or be challenged on any points, because that's all part of what we're trying to do. I'm going to talk for a couple of slides, turn it over to Ross, and he'll talk for a few more slides, I hope. And then we'll come back, and Ross and I will finish it together at the end of the slide. So if you pull up the first slide, and really what I want to talk to you is about, oh gosh, I can't read it this far away, I'm old, you see. All right, and any topic, the first thing you need to know is who are the experts. Right, so I want to talk to you about who the experts are, and then where NATO is going with new systems, and then finally what really autonomous systems and autonomy means, and it's really in a galaxy far, far away. And I mean that without being too tongue-in-cheek. So if you go to the next slide, so who are the experts? Who should you really look up? Well, there's always people that have a comment about something. Their comment may not be fully developed, but they have an opinion. However, I can guarantee you that the people listed on this slide have very, very well-informed opinions. Andrew Williams and Paul Schar, they developed NATO's initial paper on autonomy in 2015, and Paul Schar has published additional books. The next person we talk about is Dr. Ulrike Franke. She is the expert on drones, period, bar none. If you look at any of those players and actors, they know inside and out of this difficult issue. And then from a NATO perspective, we have Dr. Andre Gilly down in the NATO Defense College. Here are 4 good experts that you can reference about what do we need to think about when it comes to laws. I encourage you to look them up, because Ross and I have exposure. We do not have expertise. The other thing that you need to know in terms of the content is there's only one published document out there when it comes to autonomy, and that's DoD Instruction 3000.9. It came out a few years ago by the Department of Defense, DoDI, and that really gives some broad policy guidance from a nation on how that nation is going to accommodate or deal with autonomy, whether it's a system or it's inside the system, what are its limits, what can it do, what it should not do, but most importantly, how do you test, evaluate, verify, and validate that that system is going to work the way that we expect it to work. If you could go to the next slide, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to pause for 1 second, because we've been fortunate enough to welcome Dr. Gilly at an event.
Excellent.
3 months ago, I think, in the spring. No, maybe more than 3 months ago, in the spring, and he's excellent.
He's wonderful. So let me turn it over to Ross now.
Michael, thank you. So before we touch on the nitty-gritty of what is that policy, what should it look like, frankly we probably don't know, but you're going to have to work that out. Michael will touch on that. But it's useful to frame the discussion, first of all, what is autonomy, before we talk about lethal autonomy. So I'm just going to touch on those for about 5 or 6 minutes. Very broadly, this is a slide to take away. This is from a group that I'm really proud to be the secretary of, which is almost a chairmanship role. A group of 24 nations, experts in unmanned aircraft systems across the world, inside NATO. And in that group, we rely on these definitions in an air context. So I'm not going to read them to you because you've got them available to you there. But what's the takeaway from this slide? There are graduations of autonomy. And depending on who you read, and then depending on what kind of metric you use, today it's probably useful to talk about Elon Musk's view of the world, which is 0 to 5 or 1 to 5. So consider 1 being a very, very basic level of autonomy in the car, automatic windows, perhaps some warnings and indicators. Level 2, bit of automatic braking, and at the high end of level 2 towards level 3, automatic braking, automatic steering. These are things that we are familiar with. Level 5, which is what Elon would like, is you get in the car and it takes you somewhere without you touching anything. So as a ballpark, there's a 0 to 5. There is there's a 1 to 10 level that's out there that is particularly pertinent, which you can dig into, and you'll find it through some of the references that Michael gave you. So that said, next slide, please. I'm just going to give a very brief overview of what's there today, vice those levels of autonomy. So what you're seeing now, and it's about a minute on each slide, Elisa. So what you're seeing now is land. This is Army. Now, if you look at the top left, you've got this tiny little widget there. This Black Hornet 2, it can fly for 35 minutes, and it's got 2 cameras, and it's got forward-looking infrared, and it is autonomous. It is set off with a controller, but then it'll go into a building, go around that building, and come back out again. Now, anyone who's played with assets of this size will recognise that 35 minutes is a staggering endurance for such a small thing. It's traditionally sort of 8 to 12 minutes. As you go around the slide anti-clockwise, go down from that Hornet, you're getting into the slightly larger UAV or drone, as they're colloquially called, that would be used at a slightly larger group of people. So you're moving from 6 to probably about 20 people using this asset. And as you go around further, you're getting into the sort of 30 or 40, supporting a larger troop. And then as you get up to the Puma, which is at the top right, that beast can stay open for quite some time and would be, supporting a battalion. The other takeaway from these, apart from the fact that these have a huge level of autonomy in each of them, they're controlled from a PlayStation 3 controller. And they're all controlled by the same control mechanism, which gives redundancy on the battlefield. That's just an asides. Next slide, please. So high levels of autonomy available in those. This is now moving into air, and if you look at the air domain, this is the only video clip I'm showing you, because I was in the United Kingdom on Thursday, Friday last week, looking at this asset. Now, this is not a new thing. The MQ-9 from General Atomics in the States has been around for a couple of decades now. But what is new is that this asset is now being used in domestic airspace, or not quite, not yet. It is in UK airspace right now, going through trials to get it certified to work alongside civilian aircraft. And it needs sense and avoid technology to do that. It would not be a surprise if that sense and avoid technology started to incorporate some form of autonomy. It does not yet. It is automatic, i.e. sees something, avoids something. The other thing of note about this asset is there is a level of autonomy on board, but only in the data fusion aspect of what it does. It's gathering multiple streams of data, be that full motion video from the ground, electronic surveillance measures, soaking up the spectrum, using other radars that are not looking to the ground but are looking far out, and soaking that up into a picture. That part of the system, not the entire system, but that function, has got levels of autonomy in it. So that starts to raise the question which Mike will touch on later. Levels of autonomy, vice autonomy happening where in that system? Next slide, please, Lisa. These are other examples to put it in a bit of more of a European and global context. The one I just showed you is an American asset. The one at the top of that slide, Euromail, is for European nations inside the NATO alliance, and it's the Euromail, twin-engined, and that is very likely to start, because it comes into prototyping in about 2028. The levels of autonomy by that stage are probably arguably going to be better, and this is therefore likely to be a recipient of such technology. A couple of other examples there, notably quite common Israeli asset, the Heron TP. Now, most of these are automatic, okay? Also of note, these are flown like my aircraft used to be flown. You saw the picture in the video. It's a cockpit with a man or woman sat holding controls, and it looks very familiar. Next slide, please. Now on to NATO's latest acquisition. We have 5 of these. They're based in Sigonella. I'm really proud to have been involved in this project and a tiny little element of it, getting 5 of these from the west coast of the United States, 22.5-hour flight, all the way across and landing in Italy, and all controlled from Italy, from takeoff to landing, all controlled from Italy. Next slide, please, just because it's a really lovely one. It's based in the foothills of Mount Etna. The shot they tried to get with Etna in the background is actually not as attractive as this one. But nonetheless, This asset, if you look at it, it looks incredibly clever because it can do all sorts of things over that 22. It can fly for 30 hours for a start, and if something goes wrong and it loses its satellite link, it reacts appropriately and it goes somewhere and it lands. You would be forgiven for thinking this is autonomous. Ironically, it is the complete opposite. It is fully automatic, and it just follows an incredibly complicated decision tree. A or B or C or D, and that's it. But reiterated so many times that it looks really, really clever. It isn't. It is just automatic. This is worth bearing in mind. Unlike the other assets that you saw, this is not flown with a cockpit, with a joystick, with a throttle, with a normal cockpit layout. It is flown from a Windows laptop with a mouse, because the vast majority of what it is doing is automatic. It is designed to lose its link and carry on its mission. And if it's lost its control link via satellite, not only continue its mission, but if it fails, land safely. Next slide, please. Very briefly, I just want to touch on the Maritime, because I've spoken land, air. Maritime, what you're looking at here is recent trials that were held on HMS Ocean. If anyone wants to Google that, it's a very impressive beast. And off the flight deck of that vessel, you've got iterative trials being done with these assets that can take quite a heavy payload, 15 kilos or so. The one in the middle, notably, is a fully controlled, not automatic, fully controlled by a remote pilot unmanned vehicle, but underneath it is a fully autonomous subsurface sensor. So that looks like a little torpedo, but it isn't. It's a sensor dropped in the water and goes autonomous.
Can you put that in English?
I can. Shall I try again?
Yes.
So what I mean there is, if you can imagine somebody holding that PlayStation 3 controller and flying that asset off the ship, so you've got the quad, or in fact in this case 6 propellered aircraft, being flown line of sight, I need to take this over there. Underwater you might have a submarine that you might want to hunt out. That autonomous torpedo will be released into the water and now goes on its own mission without any human input. It goes and senses and makes its own decisions, normally informed by artificial intelligence.
And I think this is an important point when we come to autonomous, automatic.
Grab your microphone.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
I think this is an important point that Ross is making when it comes to autonomous and automatic. What's autonomous? If this is a torpedo, it could be a lethal system. But what is the autonomy within that system? Is it the combination of the torpedo and the quadcopter? Is it just the torpedo? If it's just the torpedo, wait a second, how many submarines are out there that aren't necessarily military submarines, especially in the middle of the ocean? And so this is part of the concept that we need to make sure that we understand. What something is doing and where it's doing this impacts the policies that will affect it because of the technologies that are available. And so I think there's an important point Ross is bringing up with this. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael touches on this a little again later, so I won't reiterate it, but it is an important point. Not just the levels of autonomy in a technical sense, but what are the levels that can be applied in a policy sense? How much freedom have I got to be able to use that autonomous asset? So it is interesting. We'll come on that later.
Excellent.
Next slide, please. Final slide from me, because I'm a graphics man, but then it'll move on. This is something that's probably best digestible later, after the event, but this is a forward look, 20 years, only 20 years. There's 4 concepts shown on this slide that are fully autonomous, 20 years. So fully autonomous, and if you look at the slide in detail, you will see things such as low Earth orbit, autonomous devices carrying other devices that can be launched. Similar situation subsurface. Ships that behave like ships but can actually go subsurface but come back up and be a ship again. This is a really, really dramatic think tank experiment going on inside the UK Royal Navy right now. And the trials and following this with autonomy are going to be extremely interesting, but that's not the message, because that's what I take away. My takeaway, I think, for you is it's the environment you create with policy that these will be operating in. And that makes me shiver quite some. It puts a heck of a responsibility on your shoulders. Michael, back to you, I believe.
Thank you. So, autonomous weapons. Ross has described what we currently have today, what we think we're going to have in the future, but you really came here to say, because you wanted to know about lethal autonomous weapons. Who wants to make a killer robot? This is, I mean, this is the crux of the issue, and really it's an ethical question, right? Machines making decisions for humans, especially over human life. This is absolutely the hard part. The question that we raised earlier is when does that machine decision allowed to take place or should take place? And so, you know, if you've got a bow and arrow and you shoot an arrow out of a bow, as soon as it leaves, it's autonomous. It's going to go where it was aimed and it's just going to fly. The Tomahawk Missile, which was made by the United States Navy in the late 70s and the early 80s, was this missile that if you're out in the deep ocean and you suspect the bad guy Navy is over the horizon, you launch the missile, it goes over the horizon and just kind of looks for a ship. You know what other ships are out there, you know what ships shouldn't be out there, and then it can target automatically the ship. But that was, you know, vintage 1980s technology. I mean, that was me back in the day when everything was exciting and you had Pac-Man. That's not in the inventory anymore because there were ethical questions about actually using that. Because you weren't 100% sure that you were going to hit your intended target. We have things called loitering munitions. In a battlefield, you have these kinds of munitions that look for specific devices. It could be a tank, or it could be maybe a radar. And so you launch these missiles, and in a given environment, in a given battle space, these missiles just loiter, and they circle, and they wait. And so when the bad guy turns on the enemy radar, or turns on some kind of communications device, and the loitering munition picks that up, it homes in on that signal and then attacks. But those are under confined, deterministic conditions. You know where the battlefield is. You know what you're looking for. It's already predetermined, and then the commander comes in and says, yes, I want to use this capability under these conditions for this effect. And then you know when the effect is going to be over because the munition runs out of gas or it hits its intended target. But then you look at other things, and now we're talking speed. There's this thing called a CRAM, a Counter Rocket Artillery and Mortar Device.
You're going to have to speak English on that one, Michael.
So I can. If you think of R2-D2 from the Star Wars series, the old one, attach a really big gun to him. And that's what it looks like. It's the Phalanx System from the Navy ship. It's brought onto the land, and it's installed at fixed installations like an airfield. Its job is to always be on alert for if an artillery round comes in or a mortar round, which is usually launched from very close proximity and goes up and goes down, and you have about 30 to 90 seconds to react. And react means you see it, you recognize it, and then you do something about it. That's a lot faster than a normal human person can do. And so the CRAM uses a lot of AI, and there's a human in the loop, and it goes through a 27-step algorithm to determine is what's coming in a flock of birds, a plane, or an artillery round or a mortar round. And then if it does affirm that it is a mortar round, it alerts the human operator who just presses a button to say, shoot. But it happens very fast. And so there's a great deal of automatic decision making in there. But now the time scale is crunched. And then you can look at other things like having systems that scan over a wide area and just automatically look at everything that's out there. And instead of looking at specific topics, they look at everything and they surveil everything. They suck it up like a vacuum. Now we're really kind of straying far afield from a policy because, wait a second, in the battlefield that might be a good thing, but, you know, over a town, maybe not so much. And now we talk about killer robots. So what is it on the ethical challenge? Is it the bow and arrow analogy? Is it the counter rocket analogy? Or is it the killer robots that's really going to puzzle you as policymakers? When we say we cannot have lethal autonomous weapons, all right, what are we really trying to get rid of? What is the problem we're trying to solve?
Michael, I have to just interrupt you very briefly to
Yeah.
add some context to this. Michael briefly touched on this time difference and speed that is traditionally required in a military environment. I happen to be, and you sparked me with this, Michael, I happen to be on board a UK destroyer for the test firing of the British version of Phalanx, the first time it was ever fired. It sounded like an 8-second burst of somebody in the bathroom, is all I can describe. And it was depleted uranium being fired for 8 seconds. And I remember asking the XO of the ship, why so long? Why are we talking 8 seconds? And to reiterate Michael's point, the automatic system think there's a missile. Human confirmed it's a missile. Okay, you have control. The autonomous operation then takes the missile down, but does something the human couldn't do. It didn't just shoot the missile. It continued for 8 seconds, shooting all the shrapnel. Nothing reached the ship. That kind of really puts that into perspective for you. Back to you, Michael.
Excellent. Thanks, Ross. So here's the ethical question that is almost kind of already answered. And I want to pause this. In a case of when we have an autonomous weapon system, who's responsible? Who is it? And you can see sort of the options on there, and that's part of the policy. That's part of the challenge that you are going to have to figure out. There's ways that we can work through it, but that's what you need to think about. And then the real kicker is this. It used to be in Ross's day, in his prime, and in my day, in my prime, it was the military that was really leading, and the defense establishment that was really leading the cutting edge technology. Now it's not. It's the civil community. And okay, so governmental policies for governmental programs, how does that affect a civilian program? Maybe it's a different kind of policy that we need. Maybe it's a law.
Totally different dynamics.
Yes.
Yeah.
So next slide. And we're wrapping up on the slides so we can hopefully get into the question and answers. So I talked to you some of the ethical challenges of autonomy, and here's sort of a response to the ethical challenges. And this is absolutely important that everybody needs to know. The NATO allies, the European allies and partners, the individual states that we have that share the same rule of law mentality follow the law of armed conflict. The law of armed conflict is basically the enshrinement of the international human rights law, or the law on human rights, and it has these maxims that you have to follow. Proportionality, conditionality. It can't be indiscriminate. All of these are already within the processes that the individual nations and NATO has. A good example of this is NATO's targeting process. And not to get into the weeds, but before any bomb is dropped within a conflict, it's not like in the movies where it's, let the guys go out and they can drop bombs where they see and they're picking targets of opportunity. There is a 6-step process where they have to fix, find, target, track, engage, assess all of those targets. Those targets come from a target list that is pre-approved, gone through a legal review, and then a proportionality assessment to ensure that we're following the law that our own nations have set up. Is that law sufficient? Is it verifiable when you have something where it autonomously makes a decision and you cannot tell how that decision was made? AI is a great thing, but you can't tell how you got the answer in AI if it goes through some kind of machine learning as opposed to some other kind of AI or probabilistic means of determining AI. So these are very careful conditions that you have to look into. So when we say law of, lethal autonomous weapons, okay, how do we deal with that within our policy, knowing that we also have these other laws that we follow? But then, just when you know the game, or just when you know the rules, I changed the game. That was a great line that somebody come up with. The security dilemma. If you don't know what the security dilemma, it's pretty easy. You're a shepherd. You go out one day with your flock. You see on another hill, there's another shepherd with his flock. You wave, they wave. The next day you go back, and they all of a sudden have a stick, a staff. You don't have a staff. They've got a staff. Oh, what do? Well, you go back home and you get a staff because you're not really sure. You don't know what that other guy is doing. Well, then you look over and they see you with a staff, and then they have a rock and a staff. And then you go back and you get a bow and arrow. And then they go back and they get 2 more shepherds to be with them. Because anytime you need something, the security dilemma is when you do something to protect yourself for your own security, it impacts what the other person is doing. And so, civils are leading the charge. Like-minded nations do and follow the rules, but not every like-minded nation or not every nation out there is like us and thinks the same way. So what happens when they do something? How does that affect our ability to make the policies? I don't have those answers, but those answers are starting to get out there and we need to talk through them. So, and this is the final slide, and then we can go into questions, and I'm going to go through this a little faster than we originally anticipated. But what does all this mean to you? And Ross, I really do want you to jump in here. First and foremost, as a professional in foreign policy, every question that comes to you is hard. The easy ones are already solved. But if it comes to you in your office and you see it in your day-to-day jobs, they're not easy, are they? There's no right answer. You've been in school. You've been in school for many years. You've got some professional background where 1 + 1 makes 2. But right now, there is no right answer. There's a best answer, or sometimes there's a least worst answer, but it's based on the facts that you know that's true at that time. Not all facts are facts. Right? Principles help, but not always. What do I mean by that? Well, your principles may be we're always going to follow the human rights law. We're always going to follow the laws that are out there. You're absolutely right until the security dilemma comes in, and then maybe your lawmakers decide, okay, we need to modify the laws somehow in order to enable us to have the same policy. We had a pretty good example of this, didn't we?
We had several. I'll let you go on to the next one, Michael, so I think that's the one where you can give the best example.
I think you can maybe, but it's simplifying a problem helps. But as you can see from what Ross has said and what we've talked about, you can only simplify a problem so much.
So there's 2 great examples here. So one of my frustrations working in NATO, and I know Michael shares this, is everything's quick flash to bang. Just give me the headline. And sometimes giving that headline is incredibly dangerous because it can lead to the wrong decision. And Michael's got a great example. You've got to use your example of aircraft coming back from combat.
Oh, yeah, this is a great one. So
this summarizes it.
It's great. So World War II, there was an analysis done of U.S. aircraft coming back from combat. All right, so, these are all fighter aircraft, and really, really smart people, not the ones that I showed you in the front, but the ones that think they're really smart, came up and said, all right, we've done our analysis of all the aircraft. They all have bullet holes in the tail and in the edges of the wings. Therefore, we need to spend a lot of money armoring up the edges and the tails of the wings of the aircraft because that's where they're getting shot at. And they discovered exactly the wrong problem because the aircraft that came back with holes in their wings and their tails were the ones that came back. The ones that were shot in the engines or in the cockpit or in the fuel bladders didn't make it. But it's good logic applied wrongly. And so simplifying a problem helps, but not always. And this is my favorite, and I've kind of touched on this a bit. Laws are only there for those that follow them. You know, there's a great saying in the U.S., you may have heard of it being from Montana, but, you know, locks help honest people from becoming thieves. It's a bit depressing, but if there's a thief and they really want to get into your house or buy the lock or bypass the lock, they already know how.
I prefer the UK one, which probably predated that historically, who knows. Rules are for the obedience of the blind and the guidance of the wise. Love that phrase. It was taught to me as a youngster. Applied it all the time I was flying.
Was that in the 1900s?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. So, and then always, and Ross and I, you already know this, be prepared to be second guessed. Everybody's a critic. You can have the best answer. You can have the least worst answer. Somebody's a critic. Just be prepared. And I think that ends our brief. Do we have any more slides? I don't think so. So if we can get the pretty NATO picture, I think that's great. We're a little longer than we wanted to go, but we really want to offer great stuff for you to challenge us, and then hopefully we can answer your questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a lot of questions in our live stream. So I have the live stream here in front of me. I'm going to try and get to as many questions as possible. And I do apologize in advance if I mispronounce anybody's name, but I will try my best. So let's see. We have a question from Marina, and she asks, how does AI and the new strategy that NATO has adopted now impact the use/development of autonomous weapon systems? And, yeah, perhaps maybe we can, if you both have answers to it, we can go one, then the other.
We'll try back and
Okay,
forth. We'll
sounds
work
good.
it out.
Yeah,
Great.
we will, and we'll try to be
Yeah.
short. And if you see any questions that kind of be logically grouped, that would be useful. But thank you very much for
Yeah.
breaking the ice with that first question.
Great question.
It sits under, for those who are not aware, what we call the EDT roadmap, the Emerging Disruptive Technologies, and autonomy and AI is one of those areas. There are many others. You can Google them while I'm talking. It's having a dramatic effect, particularly because Michael and I work in the capabilities division of Airspace Directorate. In the joint capability group that I referred to earlier, with all the expertise in there, for 2 years we've already been looking at, okay, where does autonomy and AI fit into what we already have? And noting what I've briefed, that we have air assets that are unmanned that already lend themselves to this technology. We've put a series of work strands in to identify what can we do and where. I won't speak to it too long, other than to say two things. All subgroups across NATO, and there are hundreds, are doing the same exercise. I'm lucky to say that I'm ahead of the game, or my group is ahead of the game, because of the type of asset that we have. And I can also tell you, secondly, importantly, we find ourselves capped by policy. So on the level 1 to 5 analogy that I alluded to half an hour ago, we have taken the decision in the unmanned aircraft systems environment to steer clear of lethal. So that kind of caps this discussion here at least, but not broadly with myself and Michael, intentionally. And we've also intentionally capped at level 2, which in our language means, a bit like Michael's description and mine of the weapon that is automatic to the point where you then hit the button because you've done the human thing, and then the AI kicks in. So when you look up those Elon Musk style levels 1 to 5, we have elected to cap at 2 in the unmanned aircraft systems domain, and also elected not to talk lethal on behalf of 30 nations. What individual allies do is what you need to inform, because they're going to be looking for that very, very fast response to the peer threat who's got AI trying to take us out. Thank you for the question. Very good.
Yeah, excellent question.
Absolutely.
Long answer.
Yeah,
No, that was a good. That was
Keep 'em
fairly
short.
brief.
It's okay. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So the next question is also kind of on the topic of the lethal, and I know
That's the name of the game. We're ready for it.
Okay,
Yeah.
so what's your take on the proposal? And sorry, this question is from Solène. What's your take on the proposal by the campaign Stop Killer Robots to preemptively ban lethal autonomous weapons before they actually come to life?
This is a great question, because this is exactly the kind of question that challenges what you need to think. What are they banning? I don't know.
Which level of autonomy are they banning?
How are they banning it? if we already have laws in place, are those laws sufficient? That's a debate. But you can pound the table and say, ban them, ban them, ban them. I've had that happen to me. But my question is, what are you banning? Great, you can ban them all you want, but we have been doing bannings since the crossbow back in medieval times. Was it an effective ban? You care about efficacy. I think they're raising many, many critical points and ideas that absolutely need to be talked about within the discussion space, within the policy space. But when you say we've got to ban them, okay, give me an example of a system that's going to be banned. And then, as Ross said, well, we'll go back and say, well, that's not autonomous. That's automated. And, okay, a part of it may be autonomous or have autonomous functions. So are you banning that just one part, or are you banning the whole thing? And, yeah, so.
I think the key message from me there, because we're being asked directly the question, I have a personal answer to that, and then there's the kind of the holistic view that Michael's just given. This is personal. This is not NATO. This is not Royal Air Force. This is not any country's view. It's my own view. I've come to the conclusion that if you take AI to its fullest extent, eventually, why have the aircraft airborne in the first place? If I've got 6 and you've got 4, chances are I might out-tactic you. Well, then let's take those aircraft out of the air and let's just plug the computers together and let them fight. Right? Well, traditional war game.
This is actually a really good point.
If you go down that track, you'll end up realizing, I think, this is the conclusion I came to. We have a phrase, I probably got it from Michael, I get most of them from Michael, and I get an education into all the US movies released in the last 4 years.
Yes, but you can't answer a short question.
I can't. The issue for me is if you take the human out of the loop to the extent there's no skin in the game and there is no human life at risk, why go to war? Why even go to war virtually? What are you going to do? You're going to win the virtual war and say, right, in real life, that will now mean X amount of death. It's a really tricky question, but I don't think it actually answers explicitly what's being asked. But you've got to have skin in the game. And if you're going to have skin in the game, you need an informed decision to inform the policy that allows us to use the acceptable level of force, as we do today. And I think that's probably the answer. And I don't know where that level is, but that's probably the answer.
Okay.
But it's through CCW, it's through things like this, it's through the debates in the parliaments, that the lawmakers will determine where those are based on being informed by policymakers and experts.
And the technicalities, too, because they matter.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It does sound like a bit of a cop-out, but we don't know what technicalities are going to look like in 20 years.
No, absolutely.
Good
And
point.
the distinction that you guys have continued to make between automated and autonomous is very key, and I think maybe, and I can't speak for a majority of the people in the space, the so-called experts that are making these claims, maybe they are not being articulate about the distinction between.
Or it's such a hard topic that the least worst answer is the only answer, which is what we were trying to say. So, all right, let's do as many questions as we can.
Great. Okay.
Short answers.
I'll try real hard.
Okay, so the next question is from Justine, and she asks, how significant of a factor is the advancement of AI in the process of NATO developments in security policy and defense policy regarding autonomous weapons?
Look, all you guys are smarter than I ever was, and I am currently. So AI is moving very, very quickly. In terms of encapsulating AI into policies, the big policy is, are you able to test, evaluate, verify, and validate a weapon system that has AI functionality so that you are 100% sure it's going to react the way you want it to react? Those policies are still being developed. I gave you the only one in existence, DODI 3009. But it doesn't say it's got to meet this level. It says, well, you have to read it, but it says they need to be robustly verified and validated. So, you know, how is AI? Well, AI is oftentimes bespoke. That's an English word, isn't it? Bespoke.
I don't think you could misspell that one either, but
No.
doesn't carry on.
So it's, to be short, it's impacting a lot, but AI is not standardized sufficiently that you can incorporate it into policy effectively
Yet. Yeah.
yet.
Okay. And we have a recent question that kind of piggybacks off of this. Do you foresee AI and cyber warfare's future developments that will bring, at least not in the short or medium period, national armies having a minimum asset of human soldiers?
Oh gosh, yeah.
I can answer that one very briefly. The skin in the game problem is if people are not going to die as a result of that conflict, and by the way, that does not mean necessarily lethality in the terms of kinetic or bombs. It could mean a cyber attack that takes out critical services and people then die as a result of that. Having skin in the game, having people absolutely humanly affected is going to be a part of that puzzle, in my personal view.
I think you really hit the nail on the head. When it comes to cyber, that's where you're going to see autonomous weapon systems that have a measure of lethality because they move at the speed of light. How can a human react to an AI that's effectively designed to attack another computer system? Very difficult. That's where some of the challenges will be, but then all right, well, what if it shuts down critical systems? So, excellent.
Yeah.
Great. These are great questions.
They are tough. These are the
These are
challenges
tough.
that
Yeah, but we
need
knew,
to be dealt with.
we knew it was coming up. Oh, I got to advertise here.
We still have lots of questions, and please continue to ask your questions in the chat box, but we'll try to get to all of them. So the next question is from Davide. With severe compression and automation of the OODA cycles, is there a
OODA
risk?
loop.
OODA?
OODA.
OODA.
You pronounce it
Okay.
OODA loop. John Boyd, fighter extraordinaire, he came up with the OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, act.
Got it. Okay. Is there a risk of being left behind by foreign powers with less ethical restrictions, especially regarding hypersonic and IRBM?
Can I start, you finish? It's going to be a hard one. I'm going to speak on behalf of an American colleague. I read an article just a couple of months ago. Those high up in the US command chain are finding themselves trying to address that problem, because they're saying that when you have artificial intelligence coming to bear that can compress that so fast, and to talk about the 6 essential things that Michael talked about, when that's happening in a nanosecond instead of 30 seconds, we need to lift the cap on the policy to allow us, when appropriate, to respond to that. And this is already recognised. The enemy can react faster. We have the tech, but we don't have the ethical, the ethical boundary, if you like, is there. That's really difficult.
I would
and they're asking the
rephrase
question.
that. We have the ethical boundary. They do
don't.
not.
Yeah.
Yep.
Potentially. And they could be non-state actors.
Yes.
It's playing two different games.
It is, but it's also exactly what we do.
And
That's what that's what you need to focus on. What are the principles that you want to maintain, and then how do you protect them? So AI moves fast, moves faster. You need to make sure that your AI is going to operate the way that you want it to operate, which we haven't talked about this, but that takes gazillions of gigabytes of data. Lots and lots and lots of data for your AI to work.
And in many respects, this isn't a new problem. I won't name conflicts, I don't think it would be right to, but if you look at multiple conflicts where there's an imbalance of the ethics on one side, there are many. And so that in itself, the ethical problem, is not a new problem. There are many conflicts out there where the peer threat or the non-peer threat is using totally unethical methods in terms of Geneva Convention style activity. It's not a new problem, but it's going to be much faster.
But you have to be aware of it, and these are the challenges that are going to challenge all of us.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, sorry, this does go back to the very first question, and probably the question prior to this one as well. If the policy constrains too much and doesn't allow the flexibility required to defend in the right circumstances, because you simplified the problem, we simplified the problem too much, you'll end up in a dangerous place where we're trying to protect democracy, but capped at what we could do to respond to it. So it's a really tricky space.
Right. Yeah, and finding that balance, I'm sure. And it's not a constant balance. It changes.
No,
Yeah,
exactly.
absolutely. Okay, so some people are asking two questions, and I'm going to try and make sure that everyone asks.
It will be short.
Okay, so as NATO is a collection of democratic nations who place great emphasis on ethics and the rule of law, will this hinder NATO's adoption of the use of autonomous weapon systems compared with states' adversaries who do not place such emphasis on law, ethics, and responsibility?
So I'm going to answer that very formulaically. NATO is a collection of 30 allies. When the 30 allies achieve consensus that NATO will develop an autonomous weapon system, lethal or not, NATO will do it. Until such a time, NATO will not.
So then piggybacking off of another question which was asked by Maria, what are the biggest challenges working on this topic in trying to find consensus? Because you've got an alliance of completely different opinions.
I want to challenge that question. That question is assuming that we're already trying to achieve consensus on that. I don't believe there's any consensus that we're trying to consult and achieve consensus on developing autonomous weapon systems because the allies haven't asked to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a good answer. And just to reiterate what I said before, in the group of 24 allies, in fact, that's not true, 20 allies and 4 partner nations in my group, the consensus was, let's cap ourselves at level 2 so we can take advantage of AI in a mission planning aspect or in a helping when we have a failure aspect, but steer clear of the lethal. So they've moved the bar a little, but we're not ready.
Yeah, NATO does not have lethal autonomous weapons.
Yeah. Okay. And I think that's potentially that's very clear. We've got lots of NATO questions here, but I think given your backgrounds, I think people want to hear the details.
Yeah.
So do you envision there being NATO Autonomous Weapon Systems Center of Excellence one day? Is the level of integration and utilization a potential goal for the future of NATO?
That's a hypothetical. I'm going to say, there could be a lightsaber center of excellence within NATO, but we haven't developed the lightsaber yet because our allies have not said develop a lightsaber.
That's not as trite as it sounds. That's how, once the consensus is there, we all react.
And I'm not trying to be too flippant, but there could be. But again, the allies have not said this is what we want to do. Allies have said that they want to do sense and avoid is really where we're focusing on where the autonomy should be. And so that's a subsystem of a system.
Yeah, and to reiterate, we need to clarify, like we said at the start, but probably not eloquently, the difference between autonomy and automatic. So there is a very big drive to have a centre of excellence for unmanned aircraft systems or for unmanned systems, be that subsurface, air, land. And that is something that we seek to address. That may be misconstrued for those who are not informed that, they've now got an autonomous centre of excellence. No. Yeah. We've got a centre of excellence for unmanned aircraft vehicles that, as Michael says, are, in the NATO context, non-lethal and are capped at the level of autonomy that they can use. So, again, it's about being well informed as to what do we really mean with that question. But yeah. I get the basis of it. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So then the next question is, putting NATO members aside, who at the moment are the countries which are involved the most in autonomous weapon systems and AI development?
You're not going to like my answer to this. I'm going to say look up Paul Schar, Andrew Gilly, and Ulrike Frank, because they really are the experts on who's leading. Because NATO doesn't have autonomous, this is going to sound silly, we don't have autonomous weapons, so we don't have autonomous weapon systems experts. You have a UAV expert and another UAV exposed guy. So I don't think I can give you good, honest answers to that. Ross, maybe you know.
No, I like your answer. There are other sources that will tell you some of that information for sure.
Yeah.
But
with a higher degree of accuracy.
And I would stick to the reason being that would be open source.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, absolutely. And we have the presentation recorded, so you can always go back and see the the speakers that they
Yeah.
addressed in the presentation at the beginning. So we'll have that reposted, and you guys can always go back to reference those experts. The next question. Okay, we've got a lot of questions, and we're running out of time because we need
Keep
to
going, just
make our
keep
wrap-up
going.
discussions. Okay, so question from Michael: What is NATO's view on the potential deployment of automated weapons by third countries in geographical areas that are crucial for our domestic safety, e.g., the airspace around the Baltic states and the Mediterranean Sea, thus putting pressure on operations like Sea Guardian?
That is an incredibly insightful question. So I think you're mixing two topics. There's what's NATO going to do in these areas, and then you're infusing on that, if NATO were to have autonomous systems, how would they employ them within those areas? NATO isn't going to employ the systems that they have, that the allies provide, into the battle space and into the campaign as appropriate. But since we don't have autonomous weapons, we can't suppose how those would be integrated. Ross, would you?
Yeah, we use what's available in our inventory against whatever threat there is in whichever area there is. And suffice to say, if you look at NATO's procurement of Global Hawk with its intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance capabilities, there's a very clear correlation between why did we buy that now and 5 of them, and that exact geographic region and many others that we have an interest in, I think is the way to leave it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and I think maybe that's a really good question to wrap up. I'm going to take the last question, and I'm going to throw you guys for a little bit of a loop because it's not related to autonomous weapon systems, but still on the topic of young professionals.
Okay.
So I want to ask you to, in maybe 30 seconds, what advice would you give to young professionals who are looking to pursue a career in defense or, related to your guys' work, or more broadly, what career advice would you give? 30 seconds.
Ross, you want to go
less.
first?
I could do it much less than that. Do what makes you happy. Do what fulfills you. Do what makes you smile every day, whatever that is. That's it.
Michael?
I didn't expect that answer.
It's very deep.
No, I am gobsmacked. I'm agog because I completely disagree with that answer. But that's okay.
No,
that's
go,
why.
go.
An office conversation for tomorrow.
I think this is a great question. If you want to be within the security policy arena, you, as Ross said, you have to develop a passion for it because it's hard work and it's difficult in terms of how do you make your name. There's a couple of different ways to make your name. A, get a PhD, publish something, keep writing. You're nobody, you're nobody, you're nobody. Aha, I think I remember that person. Or you go through the long slog of military service or government service, which is slow and hard. Or you bounce back and forth between one job and another, which may get you up the ladder a little faster, but there's not a lot of security, and then you're kind of chasing after the next big thing. It's tough. It is really, really tough. My best advice is to work hard and to always have that passion for learning. There may be topics that you don't really care about. Lethal autonomous weapons is not my bag. I have no love of this topic. I do not want to do this topic, but it keeps coming back to me. But I do it because I like what we're doing. I'm an aviation guy. I'm not a killer robot, but I'm the killer robot guy. I do it because I see the people that are involved. I work with great people that are involved. And I know at the end of every policy is a person. And so you can write policy all day long, and you can go, oh, this is the greatest policy in the world. And then you come and meet a person that you think, aha, my policy was really great. And they're like, no, it sucks because it doesn't deal with my special case. And then you get the human element. Oh, boy, what do we do? How do we work through that? And so the challenge of How do you construct the right policy so that it balances security needs and then the needs of the individual and the citizens and the rights of man and women? And it's not easy. Keep at it. Keep trying. Ask for help.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the commonality there is passion.
Passion and
That
perseverance.
we can certainly agree on.
Yeah,
without a doubt.
absolutely. And that was a great point to end on. So just a quick couple notes on housekeeping. I wish we had time for more questions, and I think we could talk about this for hours, and the engagement on this topic has been so wonderful. But I want to thank both of you again for joining us tonight. It has been an absolute pleasure. I also want to thank NATO's Public Diplomacy Division, as they are sponsoring this event again. If you would like to share your feedback on this event, we value it, NATO values it, and my colleagues running the back end of things will leave a comment in the chat section for you to give your feedback. It's a short survey, it's anonymous. Please do it. It really helps us, and it helps NATO. So, as well, I would like to offer a special discount for our membership for those who are non-members who are joining us tonight. Please visit the YPFP Brussels membership page, which again, I think my colleagues will be able to link to. Select the Brussels Young Professional membership, and there are a couple options, but the Brussels Young Professional membership is the one that you want. It's the only year-long Brussels membership. And go through the process and then use the code YPFP NATO 2021, which my colleagues will hopefully write on the comments as well. And you can get 50% off a membership. So that is great. It will save you about $15 US because we do US dollars for our membership. And finally, I would like to YPFP is based in DC, so we're just the Brussels branch. And finally, I would like to invite you all to join us for our second iteration of our NATO series, which will take place on the 29th of September, where we will be talking about the weaponization of information, also with NATO speakers Stella Adorf and Larissa Lacco. And this event will be posted on our social media channels in the coming days. So keep up with YPFP on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I want to thank you both again for being here, and that will close out our event for this evening. Thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.